Alright, time for the solutions for the exponential function properties. So what's going on this one, hopefully you guys are getting very familiar with the idea of domain and range, x-intercept, y-intercept, and where your function is positive and negative. And we'll kind of do a quick review over that. On part A, you need to get the domain. That's how far left and right it goes. What are the possible x values you can have? Well, my function goes left forever, and it goes right forever. And so my domain goes from negative infinity to infinity. What about my range, though? Okay, part B is your range. How far up and down go? Oh, what's the lowest value that my function gets really, really close to, or actually gets to? Well, if you go left over here, it keeps going down and down and down and down, and it gets really close to 0. It never actually reaches 0, but it gets really, really close. And so my range goes from 0 and then upward. Okay, my function does go up forever, so it goes from 0 to infinity. And that's going to be my range. Okay, it doesn't ever cross my x-axis here. Let's move on to C. What's my x-intercept? Well, if it never crosses, it doesn't have an x-intercept. What about my y-intercept? That's just where it crosses the y-axis, which is going to be right there. And that's the point 0, 1. And that one's done. E is the interval where my function is positive, meaning above the x-axis. Well, my function is never below the x-axis. And so, all the way from negative infinity to infinity, my function is positive, meaning above the x-axis. The next one's asking where it's negative. Well, it's never below the x-axis, and so that interval doesn't exist. And that brings us to G. On G, it's asking where is my function increasing, traveling from left to right. Well, if you start at negative infinity and you keep traveling right, this function actually keeps increasing everywhere. And so from left to right, the function just keeps increasing. It never stops increasing. So it goes from negative infinity to infinity. If it's always increasing, it's never decreasing, so I don't have an interval where it's decreasing. I is my end behavior, so as your x values approach negative infinity, that's the left end behavior. What does the function do? Well, the function approaches, here, let's look at this, keep going left. How tall is my function at left forever? Well, my function is going to approach 0. It's going to be 0 tall. The other end behavior, what happens as x approaches positive infinity? Well, you'd have to travel right forever. And if you do that, my function is going to keep going up forever. And so it's going to be approaching positive infinity. And this last part's the new part, which is the asymptote. The asymptote's the line that your function gets really, really, really close to, but doesn't actually cross. Well, that line's right here. It's just my x-axis. So it never crosses my x-axis, which means that line is just the line y equals 0. We have y equals a number, it's a horizontal line. And you just keep it, and it doesn't have a slope, so there's no x part. It's just y equals the number. And that brings us to 2. So, how far left and right does it go? Well, it goes left and right forever. So this one's going to be all real numbers. How far down and how far up does my function go? Well, it keeps going down forever. So it goes from negative infinity all the way up until you reach this x-axis. So it goes all the way up to 0, but it doesn't cross. And that brings me to the next part. Where's my x-intercept? Well, it doesn't exist because it doesn't cross the x-axis. It does have a y-intercept though. Where's it cross the y-axis? It's going to be right there. That's the point 0, negative 3. Where is my function positive, meaning above the x-axis? Well, it's never above the x-axis. Okay, it never actually crosses the x-axis. So that doesn't exist. But it does have an interval where it's negative. That's everywhere else, from negative infinity to infinity. The next part is G. Where is my function increasing? Well, travel left to right. Is your function going up or down? Well, this one's going up, and it keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. So this interval is from negative infinity to infinity. And since it never ever decides to go back down, it doesn't have an interval where it's decreasing. And that brings me to the end behavior. As you travel left forever, so as x approaches negative infinity, what does your function do? Man, my arrows suck. What does your function do? Well, if you travel left forever, my function keeps going down forever, and so my function is going to keep going down and down and down, and it actually has no bounds, so it goes down to negative infinity. But as you travel right forever, as an x goes to positive infinity, my function does keep going up and up and up and up, but it never actually crosses this x-axis here, so it approaches 0. Notice how the number on your range is going to match the number that's on your end behavior. And that brings us to the last part, J. What's the line that it doesn't cross? Well, it's this line here, just called the x-axis. But the equation for that is y equals 0. So notice asymptote, end behavior, and your range all include that same number of 0. And that's going to bring us to 3, which is a little bit different than the previous ones, because it does cross my x-axis, but we'll get to that in a sec. Domain, how far left to right does it go? What are all the possible x values? Well, it goes left forever, and it goes right forever, and so my domain is just going to be from negative infinity to infinity. And B is my range. How far down does my function go? Well, it goes down, but it doesn't cross this line here, which is the line y equals negative 3. We'll get to that in a sec. So it goes down to negative 3, but doesn't actually reach it. But it does go up forever from there. So from negative 3 to infinity is my range. Next part's the x-intercept. Well, it crosses right there. My x-axis right there, that's the point negative 1, 0. Where does it cross my y-axis? It's going to be right there. That's the point 0, negative 2. E is the interval where it's positive. Since it does cross my x-axis, it's going to be splitting off right here. To the left, it's positive. To the right, it's negative. And so my interval that's on the left side of that is from negative infinity to negative 1. And the interval where it's negative is from 1 onward. Negative 1 onwards, negative 1 infinity. And that one's good to go. So that's my interval where it's negative. G is asking where is it increasing. So to travel left to right, does the function ever go up? The answer is no. And so this one doesn't have an interval where it's increasing. H is the interval where it's decreasing. Well, if you travel left to right, it keeps decreasing and decreasing and decreasing and decreasing, no matter where you're at. So from negative infinity to positive infinity, my function is decreasing. I is my end behavior, so as x approaches negative infinity, meaning as you go left forever, what's your function do? Well, your function is going to be going up and up and up as you travel left forever, so your function is going to go to positive infinity, because it doesn't have any sort of bound on it. The arrow is just going up. Going the other way is a different story though. So as your x travels right, your function, it does keep going down and down and down, but it doesn't ever cross this line here. And so your f of x is going to approach negative 3, but it's not going to cross. And when you know that, that's going to be the same number that's your equation for your asymptote if it's horizontal. So that's the equation for my asymptote. And that's going to be the first 3.